The elevator hummed softly as it climbed to the 47th floor of Meridian Financial's downtown Chicago headquarters. Through the glass walls, Lake Michigan stretched endlessly under an overcast November sky. I clutched my coffee tighter, the ceramic mug warming my palms as I mentally rehearsed the questions I'd prepared for today's acquisition review meeting. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The smell of fresh printer paper and industrial carpet cleaner drifted through the corridors as I made my way to conference room C. My notebook was already thick with margin notes, highlighted passages, and those little question marks I'd been drawing next to numbers that didn't quite add up in the Hartwell Industries acquisition proposal. Inside the conference room, morning light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany table. Stacks of financial documents were arranged in neat piles, each one representing millions of dollars in due diligence work. A small inconsistency in the third-quarter revenue projections had kept me up until 2 a.m., cross-referencing supplier contracts and market analysis reports. The door opened with a soft click, and in walked Rebecca Sterling, our new chief financial officer. She joined Meridian 6 months ago from a prestigious New York investment firm, bringing with her a reputation for fast deals and aggressive growth strategies. Her heels clicked against the marble floor with the confidence of someone who'd never met a merger she couldn't close. "Good morning, Sarah," she said, barely glancing in my direction as she arranged her leather portfolio. I was senior financial analyst Sarah Chen, and for the past 4 years, I'd been the person who dove deep into every acquisition, every merger, every financial partnership that crossed Meridian's desk. My colleagues often joked that I could spot a discrepancy from 3 spreadsheets away. "Morning, Rebecca. I've been reviewing the Hartwell projections, and I have some questions about their manufacturing cost estimates." She looked up sharply, her expression already shifting toward impatience. "Questions? Sarah, we've been over this proposal for weeks. The numbers have been vetted by their entire finance team." I opened my notebook, pages marked with colored tabs and sticky notes. "I understand, but when I cross-referenced their reported material costs with current market prices for industrial polymers, there's a gap of nearly 15%. That, Sarah," she interrupted, her voice taking on that tone I'd heard her use with junior staff. "Sometimes you need to trust the process. Not every minor variance needs to be dissected under a microscope." The conference room door opened again, and 3 more executives filed in: Michael Torres from Legal, Amanda Blake from Operations, and David Kim, our Chief Strategy Officer. They settled around the table with the easy confidence of people who'd already made up their minds. The Hartwell acquisition was supposed to be Rebecca's first major victory at Meridian, a $500 million deal that would expand our manufacturing capabilities across the Midwest. I waited for the introductions to finish, then raised my hand slightly. "Before we move to final approval, I'd like to revisit some concerns about Hartwell's supplier relationships and their projected efficiency gains." Rebecca's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Sarah, we've discussed this. Your thoroughness is noted, but we can't let perfect be the enemy of good. This is a solid acquisition with strong strategic value." "I agree it has strategic value," I continued, flipping to a page covered in my handwriting, "but I've identified 3 supplier contracts that expire within 6 months of closing, representing 40% of their raw material supply. Their projections assume these contracts will renew at current rates, but I called Jensen Chemical yesterday, and they're planning a 20% price increase across all industrial clients starting January." The room went quiet. David Kim leaned forward slightly, his interest piqued, but Rebecca's expression had hardened into something approaching annoyance. "You called their suppliers directly? Sarah, that's not your role. We have proper channels for vendor communications." "I was trying to verify the assumptions in their cost models," I said, keeping my voice steady. "If their material costs are understated by that margin, it could impact the entire valuation by enough," Rebecca said firmly. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're creating problems where none exist. We have professional relationship managers for vendor communications. Your job is to analyze the data provided, not to conduct your own investigation like some kind of corporate detective." Michael Torres cleared his throat uncomfortably. Amanda Blake was studying her coffee cup. David Kim looked between Rebecca and me with the expression of someone watching a train approach a damaged bridge. I took a breath and tried once more. "Rebecca, I'm just trying to ensure we have accurate information before committing $500 million. If I could just walk through the efficiency projections, there are some assumptions about automation timeline that seem, no." Rebecca's voice cut through the room like a blade. "This is precisely the problem. You ask too many questions, Sarah. You second-guess every decision, delay every process, and create doubt where there should be confidence. This acquisition has been thoroughly vetted. The due diligence is complete. She stood up, smoothing her suit jacket with practiced precision. Sometimes in business, you have to make decisions based on available information and trust in your team's expertise. You can't question everything to death. I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach, the same feeling I'd gotten 3 months ago when I'd raised concerns about the Blackstone partnership that ended up saving us $12 million in hidden liabilities. Or 6 months ago when my questions about the Portland real estate deal revealed title issues that could have cost us years in litigation. I understand the need for timely decisions, I said, my voice quieter now. But these questions exist because the numbers don't tell a complete story. If we could just delay the vote by 1 week to verify, the vote is today, Rebecca said flatly. The board expects our recommendation by the end of business. We're not delaying a major strategic initiative because you have a feeling that something might be wrong. The meeting continued without me. Rebecca presented the acquisition with polished confidence, highlighting projected synergies and market opportunities. Michael Torres confirmed that legal had cleared all regulatory hurdles. Amanda Blake spoke enthusiastically about operational integration plans. When David Kim called for the final vote, it was unanimous, recommend approval. I sat in silence, my notebook full of unanswered questions, watching $500 million move toward what felt like a cliff edge wrapped in shiny paper. After the meeting, I lingered in the conference room, staring out at Lake Michigan. The water was gray and choppy, matching the weather and my mood. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder about the departmental review Rebecca had scheduled for later that afternoon. The subject line was ominous, performance discussion, S. Chen. I gathered my material slowly, the weight of unasked questions heavy in my chest. In the hallway, I passed Amanda Blake, who gave me a sympathetic smile but said nothing. The unspoken message was clear, sometimes you have to pick your battles, and I had chosen poorly. Rebecca's office occupied a corner of the 47th floor, with panoramic views of downtown Chicago and Lake Michigan. The walls were decorated with awards from her previous firm and photographs of her shaking hands with various financial luminaries. Her desk was immaculately organized, every document in its place, every pen aligned. Sit, she said without looking up from her computer. I took the chair across from her desk, the leather cold against my back. The only sound was the soft clicking of her keyboard and the distant hum of traffic 47 floors below. When she finally looked up, her expression was a careful mix of disappointment and determination. Sarah, we need to talk about your role here and your approach to collaborative decision-making. I folded my hands in my lap, keeping my voice steady. I'm listening. You're talented. No one disputes that. Your analytical skills are exceptional, and your attention to detail is comprehensive. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But you've developed a pattern of behavior that's counterproductive to team dynamics and business velocity. What pattern is that? You question everything, she said simply. Every decision, every assumption, every piece of data that comes across your desk. You treat every acquisition like a criminal investigation instead of a business opportunity. It creates an atmosphere of doubt and paralysis. I felt the urge to defend myself, to point out the 3 deals where my questions had saved the company significant money and legal exposure. Instead, I waited for her to continue. This morning's performance was a perfect example, Rebecca continued. We had a thoroughly vetted acquisition, approved by multiple departments, ready for board recommendation. Instead of supporting the team's conclusion, you derailed the meeting with hypothetical concerns about supplier contracts and manufacturing projections. Those weren't hypothetical, they were speculation, she interrupted. Based on phone calls, you shouldn't have made an analysis that went beyond your assigned scope. Sarah, sometimes you need to trust the process and the expertise of your colleagues. She opened a folder on her desk, and I could see my name printed on the tab. I've been reviewing your performance over the past year. While your technical work is solid, your collaborative approach needs significant improvement. You've been described by multiple colleagues as difficult to work with and overly resistant to consensus. 3 months after establishing Chen's strategic analysis, I received a call that would change everything I thought I knew about the corporate world. Ms. Chen, this is Patricia Hawkins from the Securities and Exchange Commission. We'd like to discuss the Hartwell Meridian situation with you. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The SEC's Chicago office was exactly what I'd expected: government-issue furniture, fluorescent lighting, and the kind of serious atmosphere that came with regulatory authority. Patricia Hawkins was a veteran investigator with sharp eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who'd spent years unraveling corporate malfeasance. Ms. Chen, we've been investigating certain patterns in merger and acquisition failures over the past 2 years. The Hartwell case caught our attention because of the unusual circumstances surrounding the due diligence breakdown. She opened a thick file folder. We've identified 17 major acquisitions in the financial services sector where similar due diligence failures resulted in substantial losses. In each case, concerns were raised by mid-level analysts and dismissed by senior management. My stomach tightened. Are you suggesting this was intentional? We're investigating whether there's a pattern of negligent due diligence practices that constitute securities fraud. Your documentation of the Hartwell situation is the most comprehensive record we've found of how these failures occur. She slid a document across the table. We'd like you to serve as a consulting expert on due diligence standards for our investigation. Your unique position, having both identified the problems and documented the institutional resistance to addressing them, makes you invaluable to our case. Over the next 6 months, I found myself at the center of one of the largest financial fraud investigations in recent history. The deeper we dug, the more disturbing the pattern became. Senior executives at multiple firms had been systematically ignoring analyst concerns, rushing through acquisitions to meet quarterly targets, and profiting from short-term stock price increases while leaving shareholders to absorb long-term losses. Rebecca Sterling's name appeared in documents from 3 other firms where similar patterns had occurred. She'd built her reputation on fast deals and aggressive timelines, but the SEC investigation revealed that her efficiency had cost investors over $2 billion in failed acquisitions across her career. The irony was staggering. I'd been fired for asking questions that would have prevented exactly the kind of fraud the SEC was now prosecuting. While the investigation continued, my consulting practice exploded. Word had spread through the financial community about the analyst who'd saved Meridian $500 million by asking the right questions. My waiting list grew to include Fortune 500 companies, private equity firms, and government agencies. I hired my first full-time employee, Marcus Thompson, a former colleague from Meridian who'd been quietly documenting similar due diligence failures at other firms. Then came Lisa Rodriguez, a forensic accountant with a talent for finding hidden liabilities in complex corporate structures. Sarah, Marcus said during one of our weekly team meetings, we're turning away more work than we're accepting. Have you considered expanding beyond just financial due diligence? He was right. My reputation for asking uncomfortable questions had attracted clients facing all kinds of strategic challenges. A pharmaceutical company wanted me to review their clinical trial protocols. A technology firm needed someone to challenge their market penetration assumptions. A municipal government wanted independent analysis of a major infrastructure project. We're not just due diligence consultants anymore, I realized. We're professional skeptics. I restructured the company as Chen Strategic Advisory, with specialized teams for financial analysis, operational assessment, regulatory compliance, and strategic planning. Our tagline became, "The questions you need to ask." By the end of the year, we had 12 employees, offices in Chicago and New York, and contracts worth over $15 million annually. More importantly, we prevented an estimated $3.2 billion in potential losses for our clients through rigorous questioning and analysis. The SEC investigation concluded with Rebecca Sterling and 4 other executives facing federal charges for securities fraud. The case hinged on evidence that they'd systematically ignored analyst concerns and misrepresented due diligence findings to investors and boards of directors. I testified at Rebecca's trial, walking the jury through the Hartwell acquisition documents and explaining how her dismissal of my questions had nearly cost Meridian hundreds of millions of dollars. Ms. Chen, the prosecutor asked, in your expert opinion, would standard due diligence practices have identified the supplier cost issues you discovered? Yes, I replied, looking directly at Rebecca for the first time since she'd fired me. If the analysis team had been allowed to complete their investigation and ask follow-up questions, these issues would have been identified within the normal review timeline. And why weren't those questions asked? Because I was terminated for asking too many questions. Rebecca's defense attorney tried to portray me as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge, but the evidence was overwhelming. Internal emails showed her dismissing analyst concerns at multiple firms, instructions to subordinates to streamline due diligence processes, and communications with investment bankers about accelerating deal timelines regardless of unresolved issues. The jury convicted her on 12 counts of securities fraud. She was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $200 million in restitution. During the sentencing hearing, the judge made a statement that became widely quoted in business schools. The defendant's career demonstrates that in corporate America, asking too few questions is far more dangerous than asking too many. 5 years after being fired for asking too many questions, I found myself back in Meridian Financial's headquarters, but this time in the boardroom as an invited guest. Thomas Bradley had asked me to address the company's annual leadership retreat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I want you to meet the person who saved this company from bankruptcy by refusing to stop asking questions." The audience of senior executives listened as I told the story of the Hartwell acquisition, but my message went beyond just that single case. "The most expensive mistakes in business come from the questions we're afraid to ask," I said, echoing the advice I'd given to countless young analysts over the years. Every major corporate disaster in recent history, from Enron to the 2008 financial crisis to the acquisition failures we investigated with the SEC, could have been prevented if someone had been brave enough to ask uncomfortable questions. And leaders had been wise enough to listen. After my presentation, a young analyst approached me. She looked nervous but determined. "Ms. Chen, I'm working on a deal analysis, and there are some supplier contracts that don't make sense to me. But my supervisor says I'm overthinking it and we need to move to recommendation." I handed her my business card, the same one I'd been giving to analysts in similar situations for years. "Trust your instincts," I told her. "If something doesn't make sense, keep asking until it does. And if your current organization doesn't value that approach, there are others that will." She smiled, the expression of someone who'd just been given permission to do what she knew was right. As I left Meridian that day, I reflected on the journey that had brought me back to where it all started. I'd been fired for asking too many questions, built a multi-million-dollar company around asking questions, helped prosecute executives who'd been punished for discouraging questions, and was now being paid to teach others to ask better questions. The elevator descended past the 47th floor where Rebecca Sterling's office used to be, past the conference rooms where I'd been told to stop questioning, past the cubicle where I'd packed my belongings after being fired for thoroughness, but I wasn't the same person who'd left this building 5 years ago. I was no longer someone whose questions could be dismissed, whose concerns could be minimized, whose job could be eliminated for inconvenient thoroughness. I was the person who'd proven that asking too many questions was actually asking exactly the right amount, and that the most valuable people in any organization are those brave enough to seek uncomfortable truths. Today, Chen Strategic Advisory employs over 50 people across 4 offices. We've prevented an estimated $12 billion in potential losses for our clients, identified fraud in dozens of transactions, and helped establish new industry standards for due diligence practices. But the real measure of our success isn't in the money saved or the scandals prevented. It's in the hundreds of analysts who've learned that asking questions isn't a career liability, it's a career advantage. Every month, I receive emails from young professionals who've been told they ask too many questions, who've been criticized for being too thorough, who've been made to feel that their careful analysis is somehow problematic. I tell them all the same thing: the right organization will pay you handsomely for asking questions that others are afraid to ask. The wrong organization will punish you for the very thing that makes you valuable, and if you find yourself working for the wrong organization, have the courage to leave and build something better, because in the end, the most dangerous question isn't the one that makes people uncomfortable. It's the one that never gets asked at all. Rebecca Sterling learned that lesson the hard way, from a federal prison cell where she had plenty of time to think about the questions she'd refused to hear. I learned it too, but my lesson came with a different ending: a thriving business, a respected reputation, and the satisfaction of knowing that asking too many questions had become the most valuable skill I could offer the world. The market rewards truth seekers, even when, especially when, the truth is uncomfortable. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to your career is being fired for doing exactly what you should be doing. You just have to be brave enough to turn that firing into a business plan. 7 years after leaving Meridian, I was standing in the conference room of our London office, looking out at the Thames while video conferencing with our teams in Tokyo, Sydney, and Frankfurt. Chen Strategic Advisory had become a global operation, but the call I'd just received would test everything we'd built. "Sarah," came the voice of James Morrison, our London managing director, "we have a situation that's bigger than anything we've handled before." On the screen appeared documents in German, Japanese, and English, all related to a proposed $50 billion merger between European pharmaceutical giant Heidelberg Industries and Japanese technology conglomerate Yamamoto Corporation. It was called the largest cross-border acquisition in pharmaceutical history. "The European Union has hired us to conduct an independent due diligence review," James continued. "There are concerns that the standard regulatory review process isn't sufficient for a deal of this magnitude and complexity." I studied the preliminary documents, feeling that familiar tingle of recognition when numbers don't quite align. "What's the timeline?" 6 weeks. "The merger is scheduled for final approval in 2 months, but there are whispers that something significant has been overlooked in the review process." It was the Hartwell situation all over again, but magnified by a factor of 100 and complicated by international regulations, currency fluctuations, and cultural differences in business practices. Assemble the full team, I said. If we're going to question a $50 billion deal, we're going to do it right. Our investigation revealed layers of complexity that made the Hartwell acquisition look simple by comparison. Heidelberg Industries had subsidiaries in 17 countries, each with different regulatory requirements and reporting standards. Yamamoto Corp had licensing agreements with over 200 technology companies, many of which contained clauses that could be triggered by a change in ownership, but it was Lisa Rodriguez, now our chief forensic analyst, who found the smoking gun. Sarah, you need to see this, she said, calling me at 2 a.m. from our Frankfurt office. I've been tracking Heidelberg's intellectual property portfolio, and there's a problem with their patent protection in Asian markets. She shared her screen, showing a complex web of patent filings and legal challenges. Heidelberg's most valuable drug patents, the ones that justify most of the merger's projected value, are being challenged in Chinese and Indian courts. If those challenges succeed, it could invalidate patent protection for products representing $30 billion in projected revenue. How is this not in the public filings? It is, but it's buried in footnotes across dozens of subsidiary reports filed in different jurisdictions. Each individual challenge looks minor, but taken together, they represent a coordinated effort to invalidate Heidelberg's core patents. I felt the familiar chill of recognition. We were looking at another Hartwell situation, but with zeros added to every number. Who else knows about this? That's the interesting part. The law firm representing the patent challengers? They also represent 3 companies that have been positioning themselves to enter the pharmaceutical market. Companies that would benefit enormously if Heidelberg's patents were invalidated just as they're being integrated into a larger corporate structure. Over the next 3 weeks, our team worked around the clock to map out the full scope of the patent challenges. What we discovered was a sophisticated strategy to exploit the chaos period during a major merger, when patent protection might be most vulnerable to legal challenges. This isn't just about patent law, I explained to the EU Regulatory Committee via video conference. Someone has orchestrated a coordinated attack on Heidelberg's intellectual property, timed to coincide with the merger when the company would be most distracted and least able to defend its patents effectively. The implications were staggering. If the merger proceeded and the patent challenges succeeded, Yamamoto Corp would find itself owning a pharmaceutical company whose most valuable assets had been legally stripped away. The resulting losses would ripple through global markets, potentially triggering a pharmaceutical industry crisis. Ms. Chen, said Dr. Wilhelm Kruger, the EU's lead regulatory official, are you recommending that we block this merger entirely? I'm recommending that we require full disclosure of the patent challenge risks and mandate a comprehensive IP protection strategy before allowing the merger to proceed. The current structure essentially guarantees that European and Japanese investors will bear the losses while the challenging companies profit from the chaos. The response was swift and decisive. The EU issued an emergency order suspending the merger pending resolution of the patent challenges. Yamamoto Corp stock dropped 15% in after-hours trading. Heidelberg Industries' market value fell by $12 billion overnight, but within 72 hours, something interesting happened. The companies challenging Heidelberg's patents suddenly began withdrawing their legal filings. One by one, the coordinated attack that had taken years to orchestrate began falling apart under regulatory scrutiny. 2 months later, I received a call that explained everything. Ms. Chen, this is Dr. Akiko Tanaka from Yamamoto Corp's legal department. I think we need to talk. Dr. Tanaka had been Yamamoto's lead intellectual property attorney for the merger. What she told me during our confidential meeting in Geneva made the Hartwell and Rebecca Sterling cases look like minor corporate disputes. The patent challenges weren't random, she said, sliding a thick folder across the table. They were coordinated by a consortium of investment firms that had taken massive short positions against both Heidelberg and Yamamoto. They were planning to profit from the merger's failure. The documents she provided showed a conspiracy involving 12 investment firms, 3 law firms, and a network of shell companies across 7 countries. They had invested years and hundreds of millions of dollars in a strategy to destroy the merger through legal challenges, then profit from the resulting market chaos. How did you discover this? I started asking questions about the timing of the patent challenges. When I raised concerns with my supervisors, I was told to focus on completing the merger paperwork and not to worry about external legal issues. She paused, a bitter smile crossing her face. I was told I was asking too many questions. The irony was perfect. Once again, someone had been discouraged from asking the questions that would have revealed a massive fraud. Dr. Tanaka, why are you bringing this to me? Because your investigation saved both our companies from walking into a trap that would have cost us everything. I wanted to make sure you understood the full scope of what you prevented. 6 months later, I found myself in Washington, D.C., testifying before a joint congressional committee investigating international financial fraud. The Heidelberg-Yamamoto case had become a landmark example of how sophisticated financial criminals were exploiting the complexity of global mergers to manipulate markets. Ms. Chen, said Congressman Robert Fletcher, the committee chairman, in your expert opinion, how many similar schemes might be operating in the current market? Based on our analysis of global merger activity over the past 5 years, we've identified patterns suggesting at least 30 major acquisitions where similar coordinated attacks on intellectual property or regulatory approvals may have influenced deal outcomes. The total market manipulation could exceed $500 billion. The hearing room buzzed with murmurs. Financial reporters furiously took notes. In the gallery, I could see representatives from major investment firms looking increasingly uncomfortable. And all of this could have been prevented if someone had asked the right questions during the due diligence process. That's correct. In every case we've examined, the warning signs were present in the public record. But they were scattered across multiple jurisdictions and buried in technical filings that most reviewers didn't have the time or expertise to analyze comprehensively. Congressman Fletcher leaned forward. Ms. Chen, what would you recommend to prevent this type of fraud in the future? Mandate comprehensive due diligence for any merger over $10 billion, require independent third-party analysis of all intellectual property claims, and create severe penalties for discouraging analysts from asking legitimate questions about deal structures. Following the congressional hearing, I received an unexpected call from Harvard Business School. Ms. Chen, this is Dean Patricia Williams. We'd like to offer you a visiting professorship to develop a new curriculum on strategic questioning and due diligence excellence. Harvard wanted me to create a program that would teach the next generation of business leaders how to ask the right questions, how to recognize when they weren't getting complete answers, and how to build organizational cultures that rewarded thoroughness over speed. The first class of my strategic questioning program included students from around the world, many of whom had been told at internships that they asked too many questions. I began each semester with the same story, how being fired for asking questions had led to building a global consulting firm and preventing billions in fraudulent losses. The most successful leaders aren't those who have all the answers, I would tell them. They're the ones who ask the questions that others are afraid to ask. One student, Maria Santos from Brazil, raised her hand during my third lecture. Professor Chen, what if asking questions damages your relationships with senior executives? What if they see you as difficult to work with? I smiled, remembering my younger self asking the same question. Maria, if asking legitimate questions about billion-dollar decisions makes executives uncomfortable, you're working for the wrong executives. The right leaders will pay you handsomely for asking questions that save them from making catastrophic mistakes. By the 10th anniversary of my firing from Meridian, Chen's strategic advisory had evolved into something I'd never imagined. We had offices on every continent, employed over 300 people, and had prevented an estimated $50 billion in fraudulent or poorly structured deals, but more importantly, we'd trained thousands of analysts, consultants, and executives in the art of strategic questioning. Our alumni worked at major corporations, government agencies, and regulatory bodies around the world, creating a network of professionals who understood that asking questions wasn't obstruction, it was protection. I established the Chen Foundation for strategic analysis, providing scholarships for students who demonstrated exceptional questioning skills and supporting research into fraud prevention and due diligence excellence. The Foundation's first major project was a global database of merger and acquisition failures, cataloging the questions that should have been asked and the warning signs that should have been heeded. It became a standard reference tool for regulators and investors worldwide. Rebecca Sterling was released from federal prison after serving 6 years of her 8-year sentence. Upon her release, she gave a series of interviews where she blamed her conviction on overzealous prosecution and disgruntled former employees. When a financial news network asked if I wanted to respond to her comments, I declined. Rebecca Sterling's story speaks for itself, I told the reporter. She spent her career discouraging people from asking questions, and she paid the price when those unasked questions would have prevented billions in losses. I'm more interested in helping the next generation ask better questions than in relitigating the past. But the past had a way of catching up. 3 months after her release, Rebecca was arrested again, this time for securities fraud related to deals she'd structured before joining Meridian. The investigation revealed that her pattern of rushing through due diligence and dismissing analyst concerns had been consistent throughout her career. She was sentenced to another 12 years in prison. This time, there were no interviews or blame shifting. The evidence was overwhelming, and even her own defense attorneys advised her to accept responsibility. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.